Alright, in this video we're going to just go over a little bit about the AQL language in a little more detail. So I'm going to head into Inboard and open up a metric here, since that's where we can see most of what goes into the AQL language. So we can see that there's two real types of item within the AQL language. There are functions, which are how the values are aggregated, and there are parameters, which is how those items are split apart. So with the functions, you have a few different types: sum, count, min, max, average, top, bottom, absolute, null if zero, and zero if null. All of these have a little bit of explanation about them. So for example, the sum is a calculation of a total, and what you need to keep in mind when working with these functions in Inzata is it's less like your traditional math, it's more like you're doing calculus or algebra. So instead of doing something like 2 plus 2 equals 4, you have more A plus B equals C. And the reason why I phrase it that way is you're looking more at these items as lists of numbers rather than a single number, because what you're really doing in Inzata is aggregations, which is basically math on whole tables. So for example, this sum value is going to combine everything into a single number. So if I have a table and I take the sum of all of the numbers within that table, that's going to be the output. But if I do a sum and then I split it with this parameter here, dice, that is going to split my sum apart. So for example, if I was taking a survey and I was taking the sum of all people who said they had green eyes, I could split that into a list of people by their eye color and see the list of green eyes that way with dice, because I would be looking at the total number of people diced by eye color. Or I could alternatively slice to see just those people who have green eyes. So those are the two main parameters within Inzata, and dice is how something gets broken apart. So think of that as the buckets those numbers fall into, and then slice is how you filter down to a single bucket. So if I were to look at something like state here, these are all my different buckets because they are my different states. So for example, if I used dice and then my state attribute, I would see my sum split across all those states. But if I said slice my state name equals Alabama, then I'm only going to see those values for Alabama. Ignore and allow are exactly what they sound like. You can tell Inzata to either ignore a certain attribute. For instance, if you were doing a percent on something and you wanted to see the total percent, you would want to use an ignore there, like I show in that video on how to make a percent metric. Whereas allow is the reverse of that. If you want to ignore everything else but only allow one or two things, you can use allow and then ignore other, or you can do allow all, ignore all, and so on. But really, these two, dice and slice, are the main two. The rest of these just modify that behavior. These functions here, sum is the one that's going to be used most commonly because you're aggregating things in that case. But if you wanted to do a distinct count, so a count of the number of different values within something, you can use this count here. Min and max find the highest value or the lowest value within a subset. Average takes the sum essentially and divides it by the number of points within that sum. So if you were looking at the average of sales across all your states, it's going to take that sum first and then split it across, or take the average of that across all the states. Top and bottom have their own video. We use them in a filter, but you can also create them as a metric. Absolute value essentially just converts whatever the result of your sum to an positive value. So for example, here we see in the example the absolute value is used with a sum. So in this case, absolute value, null if 0, and 0 if null, need to be used with some other aggregation function. Again, most commonly going to be sum. Null if 0 will replace any 0 values with a null value, but again, that has to be wrapped like it's shown here in a sum object. And then 0 if null is the reverse of that behavior. So if I want to see a 0 in place of a blank value or a null value, I can wrap that in this function here.